The other is to say, I'm going to call the cops and we're going to have them stationed at local targets. And if anybody wants to come and mess with our displays or mess with our employees, they'll be punished to the fullest extent of the law because that's what we believe in. And it probably would cost as much to pay the off-duty cops to be in there as it will to take back whatever excess inventory they have. And I think that they would, maintain sort of that feeling that you got from them, which was, we are supportive of the LGBT community. We're consistent in how we apply this, and we're not going to be bullied. And so I think it's tough for them. I think their reputation is going to take a pretty significant hit as a result. I don't know as significant as Bud Lights, but because they managed to piss off everybody, but they're getting pretty close, Target.
Yeah, so in the chat, someone said, what happened with Target? You want to give the group a TLDR now that our live stream is up and running. We're talking about the recent Target whiplash. I want to call it a whiplash. It's not even a backlash, it's a whiplash.
Yeah. So I think this is a pretty annual thing where they produce and display merchandise that is in advance of Pride Month, that is LGBTQ proud, a lot of rainbows, and some sayings like "Live, Love, Lesbian" was one of them, and a mug that said "gender fluid," which I think is hilarious, by the way. And so that particularly, I think it was particularly in the South, but I may be making judgments. Got a lot of pushback from conservative members of their communities, and resulted in threats to their staff and destruction of some displays. And so I think, Liz, and some child-size stuff, where I think that for me is a really bad sign. Where the White House press secretary came out and was talking about Bud Light and the threats that that Budweiser and Anheuser-Busch received after the Dylan Mulvaney incident, was basically like, look, if we're at a place where we're getting bomb threats because of a face on a single beer can, we are really in a difficult position as a society. And I think that is this is probably another conversation about how do you address those as a company, and how do you address those threats. But Target basically said, due to those threats, we are going to take a big step back and try and mollify whomever we've offended, as opposed to saying, sounds like a personal problem. You don't like it, don't buy it. You don't want it, don't shop here. But threatening our employees is not okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's 1,000% is the thing. In the chat, I know. And so I want to actually talk with you about, how to represent, we're all in marketing, and we've got to at least advocate for what our brand stands for at some level. And sometimes those decisions are out of our hands, and we get that. But when we're at the head of the table at decision making, like, how can we ensure that our brand diversity and inclusion efforts are authentic and not just performative? And you had spoken to some ways that your current brand at Pet Plate, you all do stand for certain belief systems, but there are some things that you don't participate in. So if you could speak to that, just to inspire us to hold ground.
Absolutely. So I mean, I'll talk about a couple of things that we're currently doing and what we do and don't do at Pet Plate, and then I can also talk about sort of my thoughts on how you approach that, and regardless of from a marketing perspective. So at Pet Plate, we are Black founded and female led, and we, so for us, we're like, okay, those are two places other than pet rescue where we feel like we have the license to lean in and support it, and we want to make sure that diversity initiatives, and making sure that some people are able to, disenfranchised or historically underfunded groups are able to gain access to capital, to entrepreneurship tools, and so those are the sorts of things that we try and play in, and those are the types of kind of cultural calendar events where we want to be a part of it. So Black History Month, Women's History Month. For Black History Month, we partner with other Black founded businesses in the pet industry and use our platforms, be it email or social, to help promote them, because we tend to actually have more funding and more opportunity and a larger audience than a lot of them do. Similarly, with Women's History Month, we've done the same thing. Last year, we actually did that with Pride Month. This year we did not, in large part because we're a small organization, and the fellow who was leading that had moved on, and we looked around and said, something this time we don't feel like we can really support that in a meaningful way. We're not doing the same thing. We haven't put the time and the effort in. And so instead of doing a month-long series of emails supporting businesses that were founded, pet businesses that were founded by the LGBT community, we're doing an email that is really about how to take your dog to a parade and keep them calm. And it is pride centered, but not, sort of out there talking about, the issue in a meaningful way, because I don't want someone to be like, well, what are you doing? And we're like, well, we're trying to keep your pet calm. Like, that's it. We want you to go wherever you want to go. But I don't have, I don't think the muscle to, fake it in that way, because I think it's really inauthentic. But to try and find a way where, like, yeah, we want to support pet parents and we want to support them doing things that they, feel good about, and take them and make sure that everybody is happy and can, strut their stuff. So I think the title of the head subject line of the email is "Keep Calm and Parade On." And it's about, what you need to do to keep your dog calm in crowds.
Yeah, I mean, and this might seem really brassy, but it's like blackwashing, rainbow washing, or greenwashing your brand, and that's it. That is all you do. It's the same impact of like thoughts and prayers, words with no action. So if you're going to stand for something, actually, put your actions where your words are. So I think that's really quite a powerful suggestion. When it comes to making, the decision on, proclaiming what the brand stands for, and then the actions carried out, who should make that decision? Is it the CEO, the board? Is it an agency helping HR? Like, where does that decision lie in the grand scheme of the org?
I think it's probably a bit idiosyncratic depending on the size of the brand, and the size of the organization. A major multinational publicly traded company probably has some different priorities than a smaller private, even venture backed or equity backed company like we are. So for us, it does start at the board level, and at the senior level, because I do think that culture rolls downhill. And so the notion that what we will or won't do, like Ronaldo really likes supporting underserved entrepreneurs within the Black community, but he is not, and will be the first one to tell you, he's not an activist. Like, he's not out there. He's not marching. And so understanding kind of where that balance is and what the authentic thing is to him and to the organization starts at the top. And we've had this conversation a bunch as we think about what the shared values are and how far we're willing to push them and what that means internally. And I think, for larger organizations, it has to be there as well. And it's either, it's okay. There's a note in the comment that you can be canceled for not taking a stand. I'm like, it's okay to not take a stand. Like, what is the Bo Burnham line about Bugle's take on race? Like, nobody wants to hear Bugle's take on race. Like, I don't really care. You're a snack chip. Get out of here. I don't want to know what Tide thinks about, those are the sorts of things where, like, you have to know at some point your big brands, like, are you going to take a stand, and where are you going to sort of make your bones? Like, a Patagonia is going to, really lean into environmentalism. That is 100% of what their brand is. It works for them. It works on an outdoor level. it's not every brand in the outdoor and gear space can or should do that, so I think you have to look within your organization and figure out what your priorities are as a leader, and figure out kind of where culture is being kind of disseminated from.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Sorry. You're a snack chip. Get out of here.
Yeah.
I'm like bugles, get in my
Yeah.
mouth. Like, I
Yeah.
don't even care like what you are. No one in my house eats them, so it's mine.
Yeah.
So I know we've been picking on brands for like 20 minutes now. Do you have an example of a brand in your mind that successfully incorporated something that they believe in and hasn't like necessarily made you go, oh, like, oh, that was a bad idea?
Yeah. I think we talked about this a little bit, but Nike, they are the world's largest sporting goods brand, I think by far. And year ago, 2 years ago, had billboards of Colin Kaepernick, and supported him, signed him on as a brand ambassador, and they were like, middle-aged white dudes burning their Nikes on the front porch or wherever they burn Nikes, and but Nike knows that their core audience is, and they talk about this pretty openly. It's like a 17-year-old urban teen who's most likely Black, or at least a person of color, because that's where culture is generated, and that's where sports culture is generated, and then that's who they care about. And the guys who are, burning their Nikes, that's fine. I'm sorry. I will gain much more by supporting Colin Kaepernick or LeBron James than I will for my brand and my mission to be at the intersection of sports and culture. And so I think that they did a really good job. They did not back down. They were not afraid to say what they needed to do. Now, they screwed up in other ways. Don't get me wrong. I believe it was Allison Felix. I mean, they took a lot of heat for not supporting her during her pregnancy. So in some ways, I think it kind of raises that notion, like, you can be really good at one thing, but that doesn't mean you're perfect. And I think understanding and articulating that is important as well. When we, for us, we're primarily D2C. We're omnichannel. We're in, pet stores, and, we'll be on other third-party platforms soon, but most of our business gets shipped to you. We talk about, when we talk about it, we lightweight something, we want to take credit for it, but we kind of have to acknowledge that it's part of the process and we're on the journey and that we're not perfect. And I think, figuring out as a brand, how do you say, yes, we got this right, but we might not get everything right, is a really complicated and nuanced thing. And I'm not entirely sure that, one, most brands are good at it, and two, most consumers are there for that nuance.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm sure there are people who would be willing to debate you on whether or not Nike was like right or wrong in that instance. That's a hot take for another time. So speaking of nuances, target audiences, right? So like, if you are representing a like specific demographic in your campaign, how do you ensure that you're being sensitive? As you and I were mentioning, like, we're just two white people. We're here talking about diversity. Probably, it feels very weird here. And we feel very weird in this space. But how do you like approach the cultural sensitivity when you are marketing campaigns to those nuanced demographics, like, in order to not receive this kind of, I don't know, backlash and accusations of not being sensitive or misappropriation?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my first forays into this was when I was working at Chobani, and was responsible for obvious reasons for Hispanic marketing efforts. Turns out that the American Latino community consumes a lot of yogurt, but they did not consume a lot of Greek yogurt, and that was a big opportunity for us. And so we partnered actually with the multicultural marketing division at Facebook to build a campaign. And the two guys who were directing it were Argentinian, really nice fellows. One of them, I think, still lives in my neighborhood. And we went, and I sort of thought that was enough. I was like, all right, these guys do a marketing. They specifically targeted at the Latino community. They've done ads for, many companies across Latin America and shown them within Latin America. And the ad that we shot was one where a young girl and her grandma are in a kitchen, and the grandma is asking her for something, and the young girl is correcting her pronunciation of the word yogurt, and getting her to speak it. And we were all like, oh, that's cute. This seems really nice. Abuela's here and we're all doing this thing. And I showed it at our national sales meeting, and I had 3 women come up to me who are of Mexican heritage. And they were like, I just want you to know that if I ever said that to my grandma, she'd have me deported. Like, she would knock my block off. There's the level of disrespect that was shown there. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that was sorry. And it was a lesson to me about asking questions of the right people, not approaching it as a monolith, and listening as much as possible, and running it by people. And I think when you're going to put yourself in that position, Michael, as you were saying, like, we have a responsibility, and I don't care if you're white and marketing to Latinos, or if you're Black and marketing to Asians, like whatever it happens to be, your responsibility is to really understand what the sensitivities, what their priorities are. Make sure that those voices are heard and included. One of the best ways to do that is to be able to build a diverse team internally, but and making sure that that's available to you, but also to pick up the phone, to reach out to organizations who may have a point of view, who can provide counsel. I think, generally speaking, at least in my experience, people are pretty open when you ask for help. If you can show that, one, you're sort of trying to do the right thing both internally and externally, and that it's not performative, and that it's not just playing to the audience, then most people are really willing to be like, yeah, you're there. Let me help you get over the line. You might not want to say that. That's not exactly the right thing, but you're great. Yeah, I'm happy to show up at the shoot. We will. We'll be there. We'll be there with you. And so I recommend doing that. Like, I think the assumption of like, it's all fine and good, and we can, we've got this, or there's a Latino person on our team, or there's a gay person on our team, and they said it was okay, is often not enough. And it allows you to it allows the good intention to be overwhelmed. A friend of mine sent me recently a postcard that he'd received, and he was like, "Are you offended by this?" And I was like, it was a postcard for the Jewish New Year. I'm Jewish. And in addition to the Star of David, it also had some Hanukkah menorahs on it, which is sort of like, you're like, oh, wrong holiday. It's like sending a Christmas card with Easter eggs on it, And I'm like, I appreciate the sentiment, but by not doing your homework, you just sort of bumbled it. And it's those sorts of things where you're like, yeah, I think, thank you for acknowledging that it's the Jewish New Year. But you've clearly not sort of thought this through well enough, and it comes across as pandering.
Yeah, that's a fair, and brings it back to how it can hit someone very personal when it's not done well. Mm-hmm. In the chat, there's back and forth about holidays, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a bit. But like, going back to your commercial and campaign, mm-hmm. like we're never going to get back to like 1970s and be able to recreate. I'd like to buy the world a Coke and be able to represent on a global level diversity that well, like, ever again. That's a one-time shot. Someone else stole it from all of us. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Coke. So, but I appreciate that anecdote, because I think what might be powerful and meaningful to us in the States as Americans is completely like culturally incorrect, right?
Yeah.
From completely different regions, different cultures, different families. So it's a really interesting journey that you had, and probably a very powerful lesson in marketing and advertising too.
Yeah, it's taken a couple of years to get my foot out of my mouth for that one. But yeah, and look, I would say that, like, to your Coke analogy, you absolutely can do that. But you have to be ready. Like, when we do, celebratory emails for Black History Month, or last year when we did an email from our founder on Juneteenth, because it was really one of the first years that was recognized as a national holiday. And we were taking off for it, and this is why it's important to him. Like, you don't want to see the hate mail that we still get. Like, and this is like, we sell dog food, so like, it's just a ridiculous, but what you have to be able to say is like, all right, I am going to take that from the fringe. I'm going to take this from the trolls in the world, and the trolls are not my audience, and I have to be okay with that. And you have to be able to go, okay, and say, like, yeah, this is a troll. This is what I believe in. We're not going to get it entirely right, but we're going to do our best here. I would love to try and recreate uh, I'd like to give the world a Coke,
Yeah, for Pet Plate, like
for Pet Plate.
how does that feel like for a bunch of dogs and cats, etc. Yeah, interesting. So like on the note of holidays, right? So the question was, and the back and forth is like, how do we, or do we not celebrate all of the cultural holidays?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
bandwidth
we get that
wise,
too.
I can't do it.
Yeah, no, we get that as well. This month is Asian American Pacific Islander, Heritage Month. We have gotten, I think it was last year, and emails about, hey, you did this for this month. Why aren't you doing this for this month, or doing the same thing for this month? And it's a fair question, and it's mostly because we just don't feel like it's not a disrespect thing. It is more because we felt like, to us, this is resonant and important because of who we are and who leads us. We have, a number of Asian Americans on our team who probably, should, be considered, we should be considering it more. And I think, that I think gets me to like the, how are we continuously improving, to whom is it important? It's a little bit like why we did more for Pride last year and less for Pride this year, which is okay. Yeah, it's a really good question. Let's put that out there. We're not such a big organization, but we can say, hey, if there's something that is important to you and that you'd like to share it, we'd be interested in hearing and champion the opportunity for you to lead that and support you in doing so. Because there's a lot, and we're not gonna. I saw some of the notes about St. Patrick's Day. If somebody wanted to do it, like, we have a corny St. Patrick's Day email, I'm sure, but like, it's not something that is top of our mind. And I think we've got to get better about making sure that we're surveying our team, and making sure that we're surveying our community to understand how important that is to them, and how important it is, to give the people within the organization some representation.
Awesome. Before we open it up to some questions that are trickling in, I just have like two that are like, I would love to know, since I'm in a position where we are just building out our KPIs. Like, I am so, I find myself incredibly in a really amazing position, because I'm like building from the ground up. I get to build my KPIs and campaigns and oversee all the directions. So I'm thinking about metrics. And so I'm just curious if you even measure any of the success of any of your campaign efforts that are diversity focused, and if you track any of the progress, and adjust them at all. How do you do that?
Yeah. So we do. I mean, so for example, at Chobani, we looked at incidents, and population incidents in terms of overall growth and consumption over time. certainly for the life of the campaign, that being the biggest metric. Like, all right, if we are marketing specifically to this audience, are we going back and talking to this audience? Or, one, is consumption increasing, either in volume or frequency? Two, what is the brand, position within this community? So how do people feel about it? Awareness, likability, whatever is your metric, and making sure that it's actually getting us to where we want to go. And then two is, I think you've got to be consistent about it. So it can't, like, if you're, I will separate here the idea of like, hey, what are we doing for Pride Month versus are we marketing to the LGBT community, or what are we doing for Black History Month, or are we marketing to Black American community? Those two things I think are really different. And in terms of how you measure them and think of them from a marketing campaign standpoint, the latter being like, one happens in February, the other happens all friggin' year and should, and is a much more engaged and involved process where you're thinking about it not sort of symbolically, but much more practically about like, am I reaching them these people in the right places? Am I, offering them a product that is valuable to them at a price that's right with am I speaking in the right voice and tone all day long? And so we don't measure what happens in February. We do think about how are we thinking about this audience all year long? And those are the things that I think are really important.
Yeah. Interesting. And I appreciate that guidance, even if it was a very self-serving question. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yeah, I'm like self-serving.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to your background, because I think this is a really important way to kind of like close out the conversation before we open it to questions. So you're a brand, and the thing has happened where you do something and now you're all over the news and everyone's upset with you and sending you hate mail. Crisis comms.
Yeah.
Where do you even start? Yeah. Tell us some of your best practices of what to do, what not to do, in your years of experience.
Yeah, so I think we were talking about this earlier. I started my career in communications at a crisis comms firm, and the line that they always used was, "If you got to eat crow, eat it while it's hot." And so the lesson being, get out there quickly, regardless of what it is, because if you got about it, it's your opportunity to manage that message. And now I think in these particular instances, if your organization is aligned and supportive, this is a pretty easy stand to take, in the sense of if I am, we'll use the Nike versus Target or Bud Light example, right? So if you are Nike and you know who your target is, and you are supporting athletes of color, and you want to be at the intersection of sports and culture, and you want to come out and say, yeah, you don't like it, take a long walk off a short pier. Like, that is a very reasonable approach to take. And I think one of the things that has evolved in culturally over the last few years is that being unapologetic and loudly unapologetic is resonant with a lot of people on both sides of the debate, where, hey, this is me, if you don't like it, sorry. And I think that's kind of for me, when I look at the people who win in these debates, it is they have to be consistent internally, and they have to be willing to come out and be unapologetic about their support for it. Sort of, whereas Target or Bud Light coming out and saying, "Oh, we did this, I'm really sorry, I'm gonna pull it back, or I'm not gonna support it," is very wishy-washy. And I think in those situations manages to offend both sides and lose friends everywhere, versus looking at it as to say, like, all right, who are the friends that are important to me? Who do I want to keep around on this brand, and who am I going to take a side on? Because you by nature of the fact that you have made this statement, dragged yourself into this cultural debate. you should hope that you are consistent internally about it, and your job is now to take a stand and to support your team, your people, and deal with the consequences as quickly as possible. Because I think the worst thing that you can do, like the crisis communications nightmare that was Bud Light and now appears to be Target, is pretty amazing. You're like, I don't understand how you can just sort of flip flop like that and piss everybody off. I don't know what the objective is there. Different question as to whether or not Bud Light should be actively engaging the LGBTQ community and whether that is their audience, or whether they are more like pickup trucks and guitars and country. I think that's like, they need to know that, they should, if they're like, something, we never should have done this because we are pure Americana and in a more traditional conservative way, and that's what we stand for. But we were talking earlier, my friend had sent me a picture that like some street furniture, an out of home campaign where it was the Bud Light sort of bottle.
The rainbow can,
yeah, the rainbow can, and it was, it said, I wonder if I can find it again.
Come out tonight, Queens, or something
yeah,
like that. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's really an opportunity for them to figure out who the heck they are.
I feel like before, like Bud Light was just a fun brand for Budweiser. Like Budweiser was like Budweiser, like they were the Clydesdales and the Cowboys pickup trucks, but Bud Light was like the dude, and the experimental brand and the hipsters, and like they were more fun. It wasn't so serious all the time, but
exactly.
Anyway.
They were the antidote to the Clydesdales and all that. And it was, let's get beers tonight, Queens. And it was the line. So like, the Bud Night, they really wanted to sort of be a fun, good time. And it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got one question from our YouTube audience, and then I'm going to open it to the Team CMO community who are here in our Zoom. And I'm so glad from our YouTube, it's someone who I used to be on a team with at Mindbridge. So Coleman asks, how important is the alignment of a leader's personal values with a brand identity, considering that some executives may take up roles based on qualifications and potential business impact rather than affinity with brand's values? Whoa, that's a deep one.
I think it's a really good one. As somebody who's worked in the two types of companies, we'll call it founder-led companies and committee-led companies, right? So for founder-led companies, Chobani was one where we took a lot of grief because he was a big supporter of refugees and immigrants. Was a Turkish immigrant himself, or I guess he still is a Turkish immigrant himself. Hired refugees in Idaho and our factory there in upstate New York, and wound up on InfoWars because of it. And we came out and sued InfoWars. We sued Alex Jones. We sued him for like $10,000, and it was a statement where you're like, yeah, these are the values of our leadership. They affect every aspect of the brand, and we want to be really consistent about that. And I think for most founder-led companies, that's probably true, particularly if that founder is not in it just because like they thought they had a great idea. Like if you were an all mission-driven company, then the alignment of that leader's personality and values is essentially the brand identity, and your job as a marketer is to interpret that so much as it is to create something. On committee-led companies, that's much harder. Having worked for large multinationals where it's just a bunch of people who had nothing to do or didn't, the guy who founded Coke was long dead by the time I got there. And so there was nobody to be like, what do you think, Bob? And it's really a question of what do you want the brand to stand for? And then it has to be consistent, and it has to be clearly articulated and identified. And you have to pressure test that as an executive team where, it is whether it's on an offsite or an annual meeting where it's like situations, and you're like, all right, well, what if this happens? What will we say? What if this happens? What will we say? If somebody comes out and asks us X, and know how you want to answer it. Like, you got to do the role playing. It's not dissimilar to walking into a buyer meeting and thinking about how you're going to answer or overcome certain objections. And I think too few companies probably do that. They have their values on the wall. Some of the ones that I've seen do it well, I worked at Johnson & Johnson for a little bit, and their credo was law, and everybody knew it. And I saw business decisions get turned down because people didn't think that it was aligned with their credo, like even if it made money. And so, but I think that they were more the exception. That's in my experience than the rule.
Interesting. Hopefully that helped. All right, Josh, you want to take the mic off and ask your question?
Is it inauthentic for a brand to stand for something in one market and not in another? So I've always stood by the fact that there's really no such thing as a global brand, because Mercedes in Europe is a very different brand than Mercedes in the United States, for example.
Yeah.
So when you have, I think Target is the perfect example for this. Is it okay for you to have pride in the Minneapolis one, but not in the, I don't know, Mississippi, whatever it might be in the South, where you might get, I don't know how you make those decisions, but it's a business decision, right?
Yeah.
But we're also talking a morality decision, and you're like, I'm standing for this. So where do you draw that line? And does that mean, like, if Michael went in and was like, oh, right, there's a big inconsistency here. What the hell's going on, guys? Like, is that, I don't know. I think it's an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, to me, yes, and I'll tell you why. Like, I think in the sense that if you look at the way I think about this is like you give me a room full of 100 people, and as a marketer, I would rather have 49 people who really, really like me and 51 who don't really care about me, than have 100 people who are like, meh. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so even within those markets, there is a community that will support you, and that you will connect with, and that you'll be really meaningful towards, even if it means losing out on a chunk of that audience. And I think, for me as a marketer, when I think about sort of those first rules, like when it was back in school, like segmenting, targeting, positioning, audience identification, who is my target? It was never everybody. It was like, nobody's here for like, well, first we're going to target males, but then also females. We're going to target young people, but then also old people. We're going to target, like, if you know who you're going after, one, from certainly a marketing perspective, then I think it is by nature to some degree exclusive, right? When that doesn't mean other people can't or shouldn't consume you. When I worked at Smartwater, we had Jennifer Aniston as a spokesperson. And let me tell you, 99.99% of our audience did not look or live like Jennifer Aniston. But that aspirational, active, healthy lifestyle was something that we really wanted to lean into. That's, where we showed up, whether it was at, Fashion Week or Equinox hotels or yoga events. It didn't mean we weren't sold for $1 in Dollar General. It was, but when push came to shove, we had to know who our audience was and who we wanted to support. And I think the same thing is true for a Target. Like, if you want to be that brand, we are too, like, the connection is too easy to make between what's happening in Minneapolis and what's happening in Mississippi. And I guarantee you that there are people in Mississippi who will be happy to have it. It might be smaller, but it's also much truer to you and a much easier position to defend, because you'll lose Minneapolis if they find out that you are doing something different.
So it's a rigor. It's an opportunity to become more rigorous in your thinking, perhaps, right? Like, go back to first principles, perhaps, something like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of the old, like, you've got to be something to somebody, you're nothing to everybody.
Yeah.
Wow, that's super powerful. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I just wanted to thank Matt for joining us to kick off our first of our series, our s'mores, and welcome Liz back to the stage, as I'm sure she's got some announcements and invitations for those who've joined us via live stream, as well as this conversation here. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. I hope that was even remotely useful. So thank you for entertaining my dialogue here and monologue. Really appreciate the questions and really appreciate the time.
It was a great, fun conversation. Thank you both. Michael, thank you for hosting. Matt, thank you for being a guest. And thank you all for joining us today live for our first Team CMO s'mores. If you are part of the membership of Team CMO, then you can come inside these Zooms and be part of the conversation. If you want to hang out and watch us on YouTube, you can do that as well. We hit questions there just like we do in here. So keep on joining us. TeamCMO.com if you want to learn more. And we'll be doing these every month. We hope to see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Woo! Thank y'all.